Could you tell us, as far as you know them, some more details, events about your old companion Buddharakshita and his life after he went to Sri Lanka? Quite a few people do ask me about my old friend Buddharakshita, who does feature rather prominently in the latter half of the Thousand Petals Lotus. So yes, we parted, didn't we, in Benares. It must have been in 1949, and he went off to Sri Lanka. And he used to write to me from time to time. In Sri Lanka, he had a very difficult time indeed, because he was, you may remember, a Brahmin by birth and a Hindu by birth, and though he had, in a way, become a Buddhist, there were many Hindu, not to say Brahminical, notions still lingering in his mind. So in Sri Lanka, his Hindu and Brahminical rigidity came up against Theravadin rigidity. And in the end, or Theravadin rigidity, I believe, won. But he had a very tough time. He wrote me some quite pathetic letters describing the intellectual hammering he was getting from some of these Sinhalese bhikkhus. So yes, he didn't have I'm sure he had a very useful and worthwhile time in Sri Lanka, but not a very happy time. He was, by the way, a very good linguist, so he very quickly picked up Sinhalese. And after a few years, he went off to Burma, and he assisted in the organization of the Sixth Buddhist Council, as the Burmese call it, the Chatta Sanghayana, which I believe was held in, I think it was 54 to 55, something like that. And he continued writing to me. Yes, there also he had quite a bit of difficulty, though it wasn't always his fault by any means. The Burmese government, which was the government of U Nu, you may remember, well, no, you don't remember, but you might have heard of it. The government of U Nu, who was a pious Buddhist of sorts, had organized this great Buddhist council, and they had 2,500 Burmese bhikkhus reciting the Tipitaka in Pali with the assistance of bhikkhus from the other Theravadin countries. So Buddharakshita was more or less the representative of the Indian bhikkhus, and he helped with the practical arrangements. But one of the difficulties was that U Nu, in the goodness of his heart, had so arranged things that all the bhikkhus, including the Burmese bhikkhus, were supplied with purely vegetarian food. And according to Buddharakshita, after a week or two of this, there was a riot. The Burmese bhikkhus just went in deputation to U Nu and said, "No meat, no council." And sometimes people wonder, why am I a little critical of Theravadins? But anyway, no meat, no council, as simple as that. After some years in Burma, Buddharakshita returns to India and is settled in Bangalore, where the Mahabodhi Society had some land. And I think there were the beginnings of a building. And he developed a centre of the Mahabodhi Society there. And since he was a very active and capable person, it was quite a flourishing centre. Though his main supporters were local Hindu silk merchants. That's where his support mainly came from. But he did develop a quite flourishing centre. And I visited him there more than once. Yeah? And I used to supply him, again this is a bit of an aside, with disciples. Because you may remember from the Thousand Petal Lotus, he had a very hot temper and he couldn't keep disciples. Some of them used to come and complain to me. And few disciples lasted more than a few weeks. he'd either thrash them and throw them out, or they'd run away. And I remember in the 60s, he was in despair. He had no disciple to assist him, and he sent an appeal, please send me someone. So I had a very tough young Tibetan disciple, so whose name was Thupten. So I sent Thupten, and Thupten stuck it for 9 months, which was a record. And then he came back to me, and yes, he'd been beaten very frequently. And so after that, after the early years of the FWBO in England, I rather lost contact with Buddharakshita, but it seems he must have become rather milder in his old age, because he did seem to eventually have some 3 or 4 disciples. No, just a moment. He had 1 or 2 Indians who had also run away, because some of them came to see me in the course of my first 2 visits to India after the founding of the FWBO. But anyway, in the end, maybe this Tibetan disciple that I sent him gave him ideas, because after that, it seems he started recruiting his disciples from among the Ladakis, because in Tibetan Buddhism, it's quite permissible to beat your disciples, yeah? And Dharada Rinpoche assured me that he was frequently beaten as a young monk, though I can't imagine him having been really very wicked. But yes, so they're more used to that. So Buddharakshita did manage to acquire some few Ladakhi disciples who did stick with him, apparently. But anyway, this last few years he has been based mainly in America. And I'm sorry to say that he's been rather prone to, I'm not sure what it is, heart attacks or strokes, and at present is virtually immobilized. That's the information I got just a few weeks ago. Meanwhile, his centre in Bangalore is functioning, run by 1 or 2 of these more senior Ladakhi disciples of his, who are in quite friendly contact with Lokamitra. Lokamitra and Kulananda visited them and stayed at the centre recently. And I've recently received an invitation from the monks there to visit Bangalore and stay with them when I next go to India. So it's interesting that this sort of friendly contact does continue. I haven't personally corresponded with Buddharakshita for several years, but I'm sure he remembers me just as when I remember him.